And I must extend a very warm welcome to all the students over here, because I think it's wonderful to have you guys join us on a discussion like this, because this is really about you and the future is yours. And where else can you find such great role models than on this podium? So, Ambassador, I'm going to start with you. You've had the most stellar career in the Indian Foreign Service, and I remember growing up with stories of you. You've had over 40 years of experience going across, being India's ambassador and India's voice in many countries. Why did you choose music to reach out in the new coming? And tell us about the foundation that you've set up.
Thank you, Minnie, and good morning to everybody. It's a pleasure to be back at the Asia Society, an institution with which I've been connected for more than 2 decades now. To answer your question, Minnie, yes, I spent my life in diplomacy, over 4 decades, from the time I was a very young adult. And I saw the world change before my very eyes. When I joined the Foreign Service in 1973, it was at the height of the Cold War, and the world was essentially divided between East and West. And then as my career progressed, and I didn't have anything to do with the end of the Cold War, but I was witness, to the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the emergence of the United States as the hyperpower, as they said. And today, of course, it's a very different world post 9/11. We have the emergence of China, some call it the re-emergence of China, and now the re-emergence of India also. So we are witness to such cataclysmic, fundamental, organic change in international affairs. And all of you young children, school students who are here today, the world you are entering into is a world of great change, tumultuous change. And essentially you have to be prepared to adjust to that change. Because if you are rigid and inflexible, I think life becomes very difficult. And for a country like India, we began as a non-aligned country, as you know. But today I think our position is very different. You don't hear the epithet non-alignment attached to what Indian foreign policy is about. But certainly we have the capacity to be a mediating power. I always look at that. We can be a force for peace. We can be a country that promotes reconciliation, healing in the world, because that is essentially where our cultural matrix comes from. And so the same applies to diplomacy. And in diplomacy, you mentioned why music. Well, cultural diplomacy is a very important vehicle of diplomacy as a whole. And in anything, I believe, when you have a strategy, you must also add creativity and imagination to it. And that is where the arts, the forms of expression like music come in. And I look at music as essentially endowed with the power of healing, with the power of uniting, with the power of eliminating prejudice and suspicion. So the impetus that led to the formation of the South Asian Symphony Foundation, which my husband, who is also here in the audience, and I set up last year, was essentially this: that South Asia, the subcontinent as we all knew it at one point, which we call South Asia, is essentially meant to be integrated. The late foreign minister of Sri Lanka, Lakshman Kadirgamar, who was unfortunately assassinated in 2005, would always say that South Asia is an integer. It's an integer, to use a mathematical phrase. So from the Himalayas and the Hindu Kush to the waters of the Indian Ocean, from those snow-capped mountains to the shining seas, I think essentially this is one space, defined by history, defined by culture, defined by
and a history that goes back thousands of years. So if there's one thing that I'd really like the young students to walk away from here is the importance of arts, history, culture in shaping a nation and shaping a people. And I think, in India especially, a lot of the education system is focused on jobs, sciences, mathematics, the business of making money. But I think, Dr. Sarmast, I'm going to get you into this conversation. There's a baggage of history that we carry in South Asia, which is also amongst the poorest places in the world, and yet culturally there is so much of synergy. There are so many layers that connect us, and yet there is this baggage. You have created the Afghanistan National Institute of Music out of a period with strife and tumult, and Bunty mentioned the 2014 bombing where you were targeted. You're running one of the only co-educational institutions in Afghanistan which encourages youngsters to come and learn music. What are the challenges? And I'm going to ask you, you've always said that a culture defines a nation, and the Taliban's effort was to kill the culture so that it killed the nation. So how has that thought process emanated into the fabric of society now that Afghanistan is rebuilding itself?
When we're talking about cultural relationship between the people of South Asia, of course there's so much in common. If we go back to the history, the relationship, for example, between Afghanistan and India begins with the arrival of the Aryans, who, before moving to India, they've been establishing in Afghanistan, and the first name of Afghanistan is connected with Aryan, also, which has been called Aryana. So the Vedic tradition, which has been traveled from Afghanistan to India, served, as some scholars believe, as a foundation for what we know today, the Indian culture and civilization. Again, back, Buddhism and Hinduism was traveling to Afghanistan, and today we have got the beautiful and the reminding of Hinduism in Afghanistan. And recently, when there was a mining contract between Afghanistan and China, probably one of the oldest Buddhist and Hinduism site has been found in Afghanistan in Misa Ainak, which is in danger of being disappearing if the mining could continue. But fortunately, currently the mining is stopped there, but also shows relationship. When Islam came to Afghanistan, the relationship between the Ghaznavids government and the India, and then the Timuris, and then the Mongols, how much been, there was a continuous giving and taking place between Afghanistan and India. When we come into music today, for the last 300 years, the tradition of Hindustani is a major part of music making in Afghanistan. But in spite of all this rich cultural heritage in Afghanistan, Afghanistan was probably the first country in contemporary time where a systematic cultural genocide took place during the Taliban time. It was not just the destruction of the two Buddhas, but thousands of artifacts from Afghanistan has been destroyed in the Museum of Kabul. And Afghanistan was the place that in contemporary time music was entirely banned, and the people of this nation have been deprived from their musical identity. When we are talking about the nation, I strongly believe a nation is alive and its culture is alive. Can you imagine a country without music? Can you imagine a country without painting, without calligraphy, without the film and industry? All this took place in contemporary Afghanistan. And of course, one of the major needs of Afghan people, Ambassador Rao just noted the healing power of music. Afghanistan has been in war for the last 40 years. And I strongly believe that the people of Afghanistan needs more than anything else to benefit from the healing power of music. I strongly believe that no one can argue about the healing power of music. It's very well proven. And again, in the last 40 years, Afghanistan has been badly divided based on ethnicity. And I strongly believe that music education and music can enormously contribute to the reunification of Afghanistan. I always give as an example when kids are playing in an orchestra, when young people are playing in orchestra with different ethnic background, the ethnic groups that have been fighting and continue to fight each other in Afghanistan. But playing in an orchestra, they're learning to get engaged in dialogue. They're learning to respect each other's diversity and differences, and to learn how to live in a peace and harmony as a nation. In the same way, They support each other with different musical instruments, with different melodic lines, with different harmony in orchestra. But by the end, they create a piece of beauty. That I always say that's the people of Afghanistan need. When it comes to South Asia, again, we all are very well aware that tension is extremely high in this part of the world. And for the last 40 years, Afghanistan has been suffering because of this tension. And not only music, but generally art and culture can enormously contribute to the better understanding between the nation of this part. I'll give us an example, the relationship between Afghanistan and Pakistan, which has been very sour in the last 40 years. But recently, we traveled to Pakistan with a group of young Afghan musicians from Afghanistan, boys and girls. The impact was so enormous in better understanding of Afghanistan in Pakistan, because the image of Afghanistan in many parts of the world is image of war. And the image of Afghan people are always connected to a man with a Kalashnikov, which is a Taliban. But there's another side of Afghanistan that people cannot see it in the media. And that's why when we travel and through music, we show that face. Even now today in India, thank you, Ms. Rao, for having us here. This 12 young musicians from Afghanistan, boys and girls, it clearly shows a different picture of Afghanistan that you cannot see. We can see in this ensemble, in this orchestra in Afghanistan, which creates equality, respect equality, creates equal opportunity for everyone, boys and girls, and at the same time respect cultural diversity. That's what we need in our region. And when we were in Pakistan, the feedback that we received from the media of Pakistan and from the people of Pakistan in social media, it was enormous, extremely, very, very positive. And that's why this formation of the South Asian Symphony Orchestra is a wonderful initiative, and I congratulate you from the bottom of my heart. And hopefully we're going to make it, and this orchestra to play a modest role in the better understanding between the people of South Asia.
Yes, and we will have a lot more of that theme, but Vishwa, I'm going to get you in here and change the track a little. There is a lot of history in the region, so I wanted to cover that first. But I'm going to ask you, you are a bridge between the East and the West, because you are a second-generation Indian who's been brought up in the US. You studied classical music in Europe and conducted across the US. I'm going to ask you, you very interesting thought that you had and which you articulated was, we should forget the authorship of where the music comes from, and we should actually look at the globalization of music. I know you just confessed that you've had a rethink about that, but I'm going to ask you, how do these various trains meet up, and what is your latest theory on this?
So, my ideas on the globalization of music generate from this concept that we are, our planet is increasingly smaller, right? In the span of 2 months, I will have conducted on 3 continents. And how ridiculous is that? You jump on a plane, you go there, and you work with musicians from 7 different countries, and then I'll be conducting people in Serbia in a month. So we no longer can afford to look at our culture as being siloed, because this goes back to Dr. Sarmast's point. If you look at any time in history, the first people that fascists tend to suppress are the artists and the musicians, because we hold a mirror up to our society, and what we try and do is create beauty that unifies us, right? And so the only way to truly start unifying a planet is to bring each other together, to make music, to make art, to exchange culture. Now, where it starts for me getting a little bit questionable is we start looking at Orientalist repertoire in the Western canon, and there's views on South Asia, which now or South Asia or China, which when you perform in the US now, we have to deal with ideas of appropriation, and where and how we give legitimacy to the origin of that culture, I think is where I'm beginning to question how I look at how we globalize art. The thing that everyone keeps bringing up is our Bollywood Beethoven, where we took Fidelio and we choreographed it like a 1950s Tamil film. Ambassador Rao always glares at me when I call it Bollywood. I have to market it. Come on, people. Filmistan, yes. But you know, in that, I was very committed to not changing Beethoven, right? We didn't add tabla, we didn't add any Western instruments, or Eastern instruments, because Beethoven itself is fundamentally sound as a composer in the way it is. We just dressed it up differently. And I think how we approach these kind of collaborations is really the interesting thing now.
Ambassador Rao, you know, the East and West, I mean, the tonality is different in the music. There is a difference, but you're trying to bring it together. And Humsafar is a fabulous piece that you have kind of composed for this performance, where you've got strains of different music from the subcontinents coming together, Najugal Bandi. So I want to ask you, in your mind as a music lover, and I know, you know, people who love music or love the arts don't look at divisions. For them, it's the beauty of the music itself. How do these two strains meet in your mind, and how do you think it comes together in what you're trying to do?
That's an important question. To me, I don't look at music as just Western or Indian or classical or popular. I look at what appeals to my intellect and my emotions, and how I express it as a result. So over many years, I've come to like different forms of music. And in the symphony orchestra, you mentioned Humsafar. I felt that while we play Western classical compositions, and we're approaching the 200th anniversary of the composition of the 9th Symphony of Beethoven this year, and it's all about freedom and the fight against oppression and humanity standing up against these negative dark, as Star Wars would say, against the dark side. So that is really what music offers. It offers a sense of expression and also an outlet for liberation. That is my definition of the music that appeals to me. So my sense of what I like ranges from the Mapla music of Kerala to the music of Beethoven. That's kind of range. That's a big range, and I like all of it. I love all of it. Humsafar, really, I have to thank Dr. Sarmast for that. That was his idea, that we bring together the music of the region in a composition. We didn't call it Humsafar at that time. We called it a musical suite for South Asia. And then when Lauren Braithwaite, who's part of the faculty of the ANIM, the Afghan National Institute of Music, came up with this composition when she finished arranging it, I said, why don't we call it Humsafar? Because Humsafar, essentially, as all of you know, expresses the idea of us all on a journey together, almost on a pilgrimage, because this is the place of pilgrimage. South Asia is so dotted with pilgrimage spots. And we're on a pilgrimage for peace, in search of that. It's really in search of that, a quest for that. And we're all Humsafars in that context. So we put together these songs, and you will hear it at the Tata Theatre of the NCPA tomorrow. It's going to be premiered, and we have to thank the Eric Helms organization for the classical music composition to have sponsored this for us. That will be mentioned in the program. And that itself is headed by a very dynamic Indian woman who lives in Washington, Neeta Helms.
But it's funny, sorry, with the Humsafar, it brings up a really interesting question of culture, because you have a group of South Asians playing it, and I think the most difficult part was to get them to put their Western concept away to play Humsafar and be more South Asian.
To relearn, right?
Well, because rhythmically, all of a sudden, they want to play it very strict, and then you have to remind them that, well, that's not what you do here.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm very looking forward to seeing the performance. But Dr. Sarmast, I want to understand how the Humsafar bit came together, and also for our audience, they'd be very interested to know. I think the youngest performer is 12 years old.
13.
13, oh, 13. That's
and
quite amazing.
We have a 13-year-old from India also in the orchestra.
Fantastic.
And her name is Athena. It's so, expressive of this coming together of East and West.
Tell me, how the youngsters in Afghanistan, in Kabul, really related to music, and what is the kind of traction that you're seeing with them?
Before I answer to this question, I also would like to make a note that I do not believe in Eastern and Western music. To me, music is a universal language, but the approach is different. It's like different languages that we've got here. And therefore, when in Afghanistan we play, we've got a good experience. I know that I might come under some criticism. When we play Beethoven in Afghanistan, or we play Vivaldi or Ravel, Bolero, those examples exist in the YouTube and you can access them. In those pieces you can see that local native Afghan and also some instrument that I use in Afghanistan from India, they play alongside Western European classical pieces. For example, Bolero of Ravel. Perfectly in this ensemble and orchestra we incorporated Afghan traditional instruments and instruments from South Asia to show the universality of music and how music can be easily adapted and played with all Afghan traditional instruments. Because Western classical music is a new phenomenon for Afghanistan, especially given the fact that for several years people of Afghanistan did not have access even to experience their own musical practices. Forget about Western classical or pop music or rock and roll or hip-hop. And therefore now we have to give them a platform that they should not only appreciate their own music but at the same time appreciate a musical heritage which belongs to humanity. And therefore we can have examples. And another example is Hamsafar. While alongside Western European instruments is also a musical instrument from Kashmir and Afghanistan, and they're playing the same composition. They perfectly talk to each other. They beautifully get engaged in a dialogue and create a beautiful piece together. And the idea of Hamsafar is also based on our experience in Afghanistan. That's just recently we also celebrated the 9th annual gala concert of Afghanistan National Institute of Music. Since we are talking about peace, there's a lot of peace conversation, peace talks about Afghanistan between the Afghan government and the Taliban and between the US government and the Taliban. So we also wanted to make our musical, to put our musical voice to this conversation, and also since there's a lot of fear that the Taliban are going to come back to Afghanistan and the people of Afghanistan might be once again deprived from their musical rights and from their musical identity, it was significantly important also to make a statement on behalf of musicians. And in this concert, similar to Hamsafar, we put musical pieces from all over Afghanistan together for a symphony performance. And that idea came from there. We had that experience. And also to show that the people of Afghanistan, that the people of South Asia easily can talk and use their music to build bridges between each other.
Viswa, one of the big problems and very big challenges people are having is how to woo in the younger generation. And this is a little nuanced because you've got so many young students over here. And I want to ask you, the purists would look at the purity of the music, the legacy and the the legitimacy and all sorts of things. But in today's day of digital media, of geographical boundaries melting, it's really it's out there for anybody to take, anybody to work around. So as a conductor, what are the trends that you are seeing? How is it all coming together? What are the pop-ups that are happening which are exciting? And is it causing a rethink in the grand old centers of classical music where they're opening their minds to this?
Well, if I had an answer for that, I'd be a millionaire. It's a difficult question to answer because you're talking to a purist, right? From the perspective that, I think Beethoven, you should know the legacy of Beethoven. You should know how to perform Beethoven. You should learn that because that is important. I'm not one who feels like you throw the baby out with the bathwater and put a techno beat in and do Beethoven. I just don't. I think it's wrong. Because, the masters were inspired in a way that I am not. I can't write music at that level, right? And I think it's that kind of inspiration that we try and learn from, And again, that's my viewpoint. But I think what's interesting is it's changing all over the world. But in, the US and in Europe, so many children play music initially. We have orchestra programs, we have band programs, we have, music education. So the literacy is there at least. And I think as we're starting to see that expand, now Korea, almost every kid plays an instrument at some point. China, every kid's learning music. Singapore, so we're starting to see internationally this concept of music being part and integral to the complete person. emerging. And with fundamental music literacy, of course, then you can take your computer and write new music. You can write film music. You can, and that basic literacy is not just limited to music, because music in itself is pattern recognition. It develops a mathematical mind. It gives you discipline. I think if one more person hears me say discipline again this week, they're going to lose it. But it is, because you have to practice.
Yeah.
And those are things.
It's great learning. I mean, it's a life skill.
It is.
It teaches you much more.
Any CEO you talk to will say one of the things they prize the most in their employees is creativity.
Yeah.
You don't get creativity simply by doing math and, science. You don't. Creativity is something that has to be nurtured in the same way that the understanding of math tables have to be nurtured. Yeah. And in allowing people the opportunity to create art, you nurture creativity, whether they become an artist or not.
Yeah, and I think for the students over here, Ambassador, what I've always found very ironical in India is that actually we have a very, very strong tradition of children studying music. Every family has some kind of influence of the cultural side, and yet I think it's a lack of our inability to have harnessed it into a conversation which they can take forward. I mean, not everyone can be a Viswa or a Dr. Sarmast, but appreciation of music does not mean that you have to make a career out of it, right? But is that something that could be a great opportunity for what you're doing? Because it's really there. I mean, the language of music is people do understand it, and very often I've seen people after retirement getting back to it because they actually didn't get an opportunity to engage with it through their working years. So is that something that could be an interesting way of connecting?
I always say music is the soundtrack of our lives. Whether we're doing it or not, it's there. It's there in the background. It's not white noise. It's something that offers meaning and symbolism to all that we do. So when it comes to the question of children studying music, you're right. Every Indian household, the child has some exposure or the other to music. But they don't take it up seriously enough. Mainly because I think there is an emphasis in the ecosystem today, in India particularly, that you focus on academics, particularly on the sciences and mathematics, you mentioned that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But just as institutions like Ashoka University have set out to do, you have to be able to create an individual who is also wedded to the ideals of humanism and understands heritage, is able to sift through history and come to the right conclusions, yes. Because so many wrong conclusions are also
misinformation, the lack of knowledge,
yes.
The rewriting of history. These are all themes that we are dealing with, and I think unless you can see history in the eye, you can appreciate the art and the legacy
yes.
you cannot connect with the country.
Absolutely. So education, I see education not just as a vehicle to create this individual who is successful in the scientific field or the marketing or management field, also an individual who, as a member, particularly in a country like ours, which is so plural by definition, it encompasses, to use Whitman's phrase, so many multitudes. I think to understand that, you must inculcate within yourself something that is so integral to our culture, which is humanism and inclusiveness. And I think that comes through music, that comes through the arts, through painting, whatever. But you must have that facet, I believe, to be a composite human being.
One thing that unifies the entire region, I think Asia and large part of the world is, as Ambassador Rao said, Filmistan. We're sitting in the capital of Filmistan, so I have to ask you, how has it kind of transcended the barriers in music as well? And is that something that you come across often?
In Afghanistan, I also, since I've been here in the last few days, I was giving us an example, Bollywood. That's one thing that probably brings the people of South Asia together and very close to each other. It's Bollywood, and everyone has respect and love for it, including in Afghanistan. Even the kids that's traveling with me here, they speak some Hindi. But they do that Hindi from Bollywood. But when it comes in music also, based on the experience of Afghanistan and India, many Indian Bollywood songs are extremely well popular in Afghanistan. Well-known Afghan singer like Ahmad Sarmast, who is considered to be the Elvis of Afghanistan. He adapted many Bollywood songs with Punjab or Pashto poetry, and now they're considered not part of Bollywood but more as an Afghan piece. And that's how Bollywood music is also coming. But also there are some pieces that the people of Afghanistan believe in, that they were composed originally in Afghanistan and they've been adapted to Bollywood. So you see the relationship, how film industry also contribute to transiting music from South Asia to Afghanistan and from other South Asian countries back to...
And to the West too.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You took inspiration from a 50s Tamil film, I think, for Bethel.
Because I was inculcated with 1950s Tamil films growing up. That my parents would bring back VHS tape after VHS tape, and I think that's all we watched for years.
Right.
And I was telling two of the musicians in the orchestra, I said, I probably heard you play before because they played all those film soundtracks. Not in the 50s, later, but, you know, it's kind of amusing to now have them in the orchestra, and I heard them play when I was a kid.
Yeah. You know, Ambassador Rao's often said that South Asia is a trouble spot. But the moment you let people connect with people, there is a transformation. I've had colleagues going to Pakistan for important talks, and journalists who've gone there and said that, my God, you just have to go there. And you know, all of this stuff that happens in headlines and in the political circles, none of that exists. I mean, I've gone to international, forums in Davos, in Middle East, and I've never seen a difference when it comes to people connects. It's only in the mind and at a certain level. Now, you've straddled that certain level where you have been, you know, so part of the conversation that's happening. You know, you're also doing a book on Indo-China ties and the history of the relationship. My question to you is that, is it time that we have, and you know, a lot has been said about people-to-people contact. And in many cases, it's the government trying to facilitate these diplomatic ventures. You know, is it time that the people took it in their hands? And is the new coming going to be with there are many more roads that are opened up for people to connect? And maybe the digital media can play a huge role in something like that.
Well, when it comes to the policy space, I suppose the governments will continue to dominate how and what sense of direction you provide to that. But I look at the larger expanse beyond that, and you talk of citizen diplomacy. And the South Asian Symphony Orchestra is essentially an expression of citizen diplomacy, because there is no government involvement in this. But the initiative has come out of the soil of India, essentially, people like us, who have decided to put together our resources and create enable this opportunity for people of South Asia to come together in an orchestra. So essentially it's also, in many ways, I believe, the commencement of a kind of movement among people of this region who are saying, yes, we've had 70 years of tension, 70 years of conflict. At our level, it's not going to be possible to solve those very complex problems. But let's be that little light that can illuminate the darkness. To quote Eleanor Roosevelt, she used to say, it's better to light a lamp than to curse the darkness. So we're not going to curse the darkness. We can't go on indefinitely cursing the darkness. Let's be able to do, in our own little way, something to bring people together.
And I do think that the millennials, Viswa, you are a younger generation, is carrying a little less baggage. I mean, the mind space is far more liberated, so to say.
I think so, potentially. But I also think that it's interesting having grown up outside of India, but having come to India so often during my life. You know, we have Pakistani friends, we have friends from all over the world, and no one thinks second of it, you know, in the US. And yet somehow everyone gets on a plane and lands here, and everything changes. You know, there's something that when you get in Indian airspace, everyone becomes hyper-Indian again somehow. And so I think the question is, how do you maintain that unity that you find when everyone seems to be okay over there and apply it here? Because, you know, again, I think what we're doing and what we're seeing in the orchestra is the idea of humanizing the other. You know, I always say you put two musicians in a room and they're never strangers, because there's at least a language of music, and they'll start playing for each other, and once you realize the other person is not the other, you know, when you realize that everyone's basic mission is to find love, find happiness, find food, find shelter, we're not different, you know, and it's finding ways to conquer the preconceived ideas that we seem to be handed, that so-and-so is different.
So, Dr. Sarmast, how do you see this panning out? I mean, how can this light that has been lit become a flame of Chiragh? I mean, that's a beautiful way that you've put it. Become a movement, and what can be done? You know, and what are the plans? I'm going to ask Ambassador Rao what the plans are, but from your perspective, what can be done?
I've been asking myself the same question for the last few days. The concert will be premiered. The South Asian Symphony Orchestra is going to play this historical concert here in Mumbai, and what will be the next step? But we should have a plan to maintain the orchestra, enable them to not only after this concert, but behind this concert to travel at the beginning, maybe to South Asian countries to perform there. We had a short conversation last evening with Ambassador Rao that I would be happy to consider and explore the possibilities to host the entire musician for the next concert in Afghanistan. Again, I know the security immediately going to come out of Afghanistan and going to go to this country, but it's not as bad as you can hear the situation on the TV. And normally when I'm traveling around the world and I'm speaking about the security situation in Afghanistan, I blame the international media for the miseries of Afghanistan, because they portray Afghanistan always in such a black pain that it's discouraging for the investment, it's discouraging to tourism, and it's discouragement to expertise to come to Afghanistan. Since the establishment of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, I hosted in Afghanistan over 200 musicians from around the world, who as a permanent faculty, but also as volunteers who've been coming and teaching and assisting us with our progress and development. And therefore, I would love this light to maintain, to continue, to rise and to become a flame. And therefore, I'm happy to make a small contribution. We will be working together with Ambassador Rao and all our friends from South Asian countries to consider the possibility of hosting a concert in Afghanistan, and next we will be moving. And as I heard you yesterday telling that why this orchestra in the near future wouldn't be able to travel to play in Austria or to play in Germany or to play in Carnegie Hall one day. So they have the ability and the skills, and they should do that. So it's a beautiful beginning, and let's maintain it and make sure that it's sustained and grow.
Ambassador Rao, you have an opportunity to widen it across the world, but also an opportunity to go deeper and connect with students at multiple levels. How are you envisaging this?
Well, I have this madcap idea, you may call it, of taking the orchestra to Wagah border and having them perform there. You know, I think we had those goose-stepping sentries on both sides, and that's a spectacle in itself. I mean, it's entertaining to the crowds, but to me, it also symbolizes something, you know, deeper, and it talks about the conflict between the two countries, the competition, the rivalry, the suspicion, the enmity, the lack of trust, and you have an orchestra of people drawn from this region playing there, whether it's Beethoven or Hamsafar or Bharke, which is a song we took from Filmistan and made into a composition for the orchestra, you know, the song from Albela, Shola Jo Bharke. So Bharke really means a spark, again like Chiragh. Yeah. So those are the things we want to do. Apart from that, yes, concerts, as Dr. Sarmast came up with this extremely interesting idea of performing in Kabul. But other capitals of South Asia, our Bangladeshi colleague in the orchestra said, bring them to Dhaka. I have people who will support this. Colombo, the Sri Lanka Symphony Orchestra has been a wonderful addition to this orchestra, and in many ways they are like, you know, the backbone, I would say, because it's an orchestra that has been around for 70 years. They perform regularly, so we are greatly enriched by their talent and their ability. And you'll hear some of them play today. And Sharmini Vettamuni, who's chairperson, I'd say, of the Board of Governors of the Symphony Orchestra of Sri Lanka, is here. She's a very distinguished personality in her own right. She's here. So we have plans, and certainly to go to international capitals also, because this idea of a South Asia working together is so unusual for many people, because when they think of South Asia, they are completely, the thought processes are dominated by the conflict between India and Pakistan. You know, the whole issue of what will happen if war breaks out between these two countries. So we have to change that narrative a little. We have to transform people's thinking and take the orchestra as it improves in its, capacity, because we have to build capacity. Many of these people are coming together for the first time, and we have no illusions that there is much more that we need to do to raise the level of the orchestra. But we are speaking a language of peace, of morality, which combines with strategy. I mean, in the policy space, you speak of strategy, strategic alternatives, strategic outlook, strategic perspective, but bring a little morality into that too.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the capacity building, Viswa. You came here last to conduct in 2004, you were telling me, and now it's 2019. What do you see in terms of the youngsters who are learning music? And this is the last question, so we're completely out of time. So very quickly, what do you think? How far?
I think it's exciting. I mean, I think it's exciting to see that, 10, 15 years ago, you didn't have a Bangalore Chamber Orchestra. You did, so you're seeing more and more groups come together and create music in India specifically. But what I would love to see is more support. We have Sharmini in Colombo, we have Jerry, Fernandez working in Chennai trying to build a chamber orchestra there, Arun Rosario in Bangalore trying to build a chamber orchestra. Here you have Ginny Dinshan, Bomi Bilamoria, who've been working so hard to keep the Bombay Chamber Orchestra functional and moving forward. And the Symphony Orchestra of India is here. So we have these things, we have these entities that are building. I would love to see more support. I would love to see the ability to bring more teachers from the West and raise the level and really educate. I mean, the players you'll see some of the most dedicated players in the world in South Asia, because they all have day jobs that, the VCO rehearses at 7 a.m. and people are waking up at 5 a.m. to come to rehearsal and then they go to work. That kind of dedication and passion for making music is unrivaled almost anywhere. But what we don't have is access to great instruments, access to strings. If an oboe breaks, who fixes it? The music, and Furtado's has done some great work in being like a really central music store here and finding ways to do that. But in all of South Asia, you don't have symmetrical access to these things.
Right.
And that's what we need to see next. We need to see more teachers and more access to instruments.
And let's hope this is a start, because we've already seen a great flowering. The NCPA does some fabulous work with kids as far as their orchestra is concerned. And Ambassador Rao, all the very best. It's a fabulous initiative.
Thank you so much.
We've convinced all these youngsters to pick up an instrument and talk the language of music. Thank you so much, Dr. Sarmast. Request everybody to please be seated, because they're just going to be setting up for the performance. Thank you so much.
Our soprano soloist, and two amazing pianists, one of the horn players from the orchestra, and a number of the string players from the orchestra. They'll introduce their pieces and themselves as they go, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow night at the concert as well.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I prefer not to use a mic. You will realize very soon why. Very, very big thank you to Ambassador Rao and Shri Sudhakar Rao for this unbelievable project that we've started this year. My name is Maria Elena Fernandez. I'm a pianist, and unfortunately, this orchestra doesn't need a piano. So I've been very grateful for the invitation to accompany our soloist. It's really an extraordinary venture, and we all feel very proud to be part of this enthusiasm, and the most important thing is that it carries on. So please enjoy tomorrow, and hope to see you at the next project.
Hi, I'm Chiragh. I'm from Sri Lanka, and now I live in the United States. I began singing the proper classical repertoire, actually, with the Symphony Orchestra of Sri Lanka, for which I'm truly grateful. I'm truly blessed to be here with you today, and of course tomorrow will be an extraordinary night. And I have chosen 2 songs for you to hear, and they're of a classical Western repertoire. The first is by Lee Boybee, an American composer. The text is taken from the book by Thornton Wilder called Our Town. And the character that sings it is not alive. I chose this song before the incidences in Sri Lanka. Now I'm not sure if I can make it through. But she's not alive, and she's looking into the world, speaking of things that she perhaps took for granted. I hope you enjoy it. It's called Goodbye World.
Goodbye.
is called Io son l'umile ancella. It's in Italian. And it's taken from the opera Ariadna de Couvre by Chiragh. And in this opera, the character that sings it is Ariadna. She is an actress, a singer, sort of like a celebrity of her community. And she has just been paid a ton of compliments. And then she's like, she says, I'm just a vessel. The creative genius just goes through me. I'm timid, I'm humble, I'm atrocious, I'm joyful, I'm all of those things. But I'm just a small breath in the big picture that's here today. I'll be gone tomorrow. It's a beautiful piece, I love it. And this is Io son l'umile ancella.
I am the principal horn with the South Asian Symphony Orchestra. I am representing Sri Lanka. Thank you to the Asia Society for hosting us today. Today I will be playing The Reverie by Alexander Glazunov, and I am accompanied by the wonderful Soundlady David Rodrigo. I hope you enjoy.
playing for you a movement from a Mozart flute quartet. My name is Dilshad, and I'm really thrilled actually to play with my brother right here. We both grew up playing with the Bombay Chamber Orchestra many years ago. Neither of us live in Mumbai anymore, but the Bombay Chamber Orchestra is certainly what helped us get our start in music. And also many years ago, Mark in the Bombay Chamber Orchestra as well, and we're joined by Chris on cello. So this is just a really joyful piece of music. I think it celebrates the collaboration that we have going this week and just the enjoyment of making music together. So one movement from a flute quartet in D major by Mozart.
Come up and get situated. I'll tell you a little bit about who's playing in the final selection that we're doing. It's probably Mozart's most recognized introduction to anything. It's from the Untitled Chapter. We're doing the first movement. And Nachtmusik in the time was actually written kind of as party music. So this would have been played while people were dining in the background. And now it's turned into one of our favorite concert pieces. The group of musicians that you'll see on stage right now are as far from Sri Lanka. We have musicians from Sri Lanka. We have musicians who are homegrown from Mumbai. We have musicians from Chennai, one from Edo. So our group here has actually kind of taken the face of South Asia as much as we could with this smaller group that we're bringing to you. And as I think was said earlier, there's about 75 players in the orchestra right now. And we're going to see this afternoon whether we can put them all on stage at the same time. We're hoping. And so we're trying to give you a bit of a teaser, so you're not really hearing anything that will be performed tomorrow. But it is quite the exciting group.